to shine. Fill this land with the Father's glory. Blaze, Spirit, blaze. Set our hearts on fire. Flow, river, flow. Flood the nations with grace and mercy. Send forth your word, Lord, and let there be light. You may be seated.
Good morning, good morning. Good, I'm excited to be here, and I'm going to tell you this is the first time I've got up to preach since those lights were put in. A little bright, a little bright. Good thing for you, though, is if you fall asleep, I can't see you anyway. But yes, I'm excited today for a couple of reasons. One, we get to worship together. But two, y'all know what starts today. Decatur Work Camp. I'm so excited about it. The plans have been made for months and weeks for Decatur Work Camp, and it's so great. You know, the theme here is Superheroes Serve. That's what our theme is for the week. And let me give you a little information about Work Camp. Here's how it works. We have 27 homes that we're working on this year. You say, Scott, why 27? Well, let me tell you why. Well, because what I try to do is try to keep the work crews to a 12 to 15 number. And we have so many kids signed up, so many people signed up to help with this, that I have to do that many houses to be able to have, enough work for everybody to do. So isn't that awesome that we start a summer break and we have that many teenagers willing to give up their time and get away and come and serve? I'm about as excited as a dog on a three-legged cat. Yeah, that's how excited I am. Sorry to offend you cat lovers. But anyway, there's a lot of things we do during the summer that we do with our youth group. And just one, we get to serve together. Then we'll spend some time just having some fun. We like to go camping. And we found out a few years ago one of our favorite places to go camping is Rock Island State Park. Really beautiful place. Now let me ask you, how many of you like to go camping? I really want to see a show of hands. Now, you saw this picture and it might have changed a little bit. Some of you probably said, ain't no way I'm sleeping in a tent. Not going to lay on the ground, not going to do it. Because, in a tent camping like this is kind of the idea of getting away from your luxuries of life and maybe roughing it a little bit. And the idea of roughing it is you might have to walk to a bathhouse. I just lost half of you on that one. I know. Well, okay, maybe your idea of camping looks more like this. Maybe, there it is. You get to take your RV. You never have to leave your electricity or your TV or your nice pillow-topped bed that you have in there. This is the kind of camping that when you go camping, you're not really leaving the luxuries of life. You're maybe willing to step out there just a little bit, but not going to give up the luxuries because you're just not willing to go that far. So where am I going with this? Have you ever thought about your faith being one of these? Either a camping kind of faith, an RVing kind of faith. Do you have the kind of faith that kind of only affords the comforts of life? Or do you have the kind of faith that allows you to rough it a little bit? Or maybe even allows you to be roughed up a little bit? You see, when we talk about faith, a lot of people tend to look for the easiest path, hoping for the limited amount of inconvenience. It's no different from faith. God requires us to prove our faith. He wants us to produce tangible examples of this faith that we're obedient to Him. And this morning, I want to talk to you about what this real faith looks like. But before we do that, let's define it. The problem with camping earlier when I asked that question is some of you already had a preconceived idea in your mind what that camping looked like. So when I say let's talk about faith this morning, in your mind, what does that definition look like? You see, when we begin to think about it, some of you, when I ask about camping, maybe you pictured the wonderful opportunity to lie in the middle of the woods and look up at the stars on a maybe a sleeping bag if you brought one. And some of you, that sounds like insanity. And then some of your idea was, yeah, hey, I can go camping. I can still watch the football game. I still have my heat and air. I'm good to go. But when we talk about faith, let's begin with the definition that we read in Hebrews 11:1. Hebrews 11:1, it says, but faith now is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. You see, different versions will use different words here. But I really like how the King James Version uses these two words, substance and evidence. I like how those words are used because I believe for us to be men and women of faith, we have got to be men and women of substance. Well, what exactly does that look like? Let's turn over to James chapter 2, verses 18 through 26. And let's just take just a minute. Let's read this together. It says this, but someone will say, you have faith and I have works. Show me your faith apart from your works, and I will show you my faith by my works. You believe that God is one, you do well. Even the demons believe and shudder. Do you want to be shown, you foolish person, that faith apart from works is useless? Was not Abraham your father justified by works when he offered up his son Isaac on the altar? You see that faith was active along with his works, and faith was completed by his works. And the scripture was fulfilled that says, Abraham believed God, and it was counted unto him righteousness. And he was called a friend of God. You see that a person is justified by works and not by faith alone. And in the same way was not Rahab the prostitute justified by works when she received the messengers and sent them out by another way. For as the body apart from the spirit is dead, so also faith apart from works is dead. When we talk about faith this morning, I'm going to talk about a real kind of faith. The problem is that when we talk about this kind of faith, sometimes we really don't know what we're talking about. But James does an excellent job of giving us the idea and the knowledge of what faith looks like. You want to talk about love sometimes? I'll tell you what love looks like. And you can begin to talk about all these examples of this happening and this taking place. But you see, faith should be, and is supposed to be manifested in the lives we lead each and every day. Faith should be active and seen by all so that the world will come to know the awesomeness of our God. You see, faith was meant to be more than a pew, a Bible class, or a home Bible study. Because that's what faith is really supposed to look like. It's kind of like being in my wife's math class. My wife will tell her students daily, no work equals no credit. They hate having to show their work, but she gets the point across. So you see, with faith, it's the same thing. Real faith is meant to be lived outside of these walls so that people can see and hear about it. The sad part is that I know many Christians, many God-fearing, believing people, that when I suggest, or if someone suggests, that you have to actually do something for your faith to be relevant, they're offended. And if that's you this morning, we need to pay attention. Because when I'm talking to these teenagers and I say, look, if you're dealing with a question at school, you point people to the Scriptures. Because then they're arguing with God and not you. So when we look at the Scriptures this morning and we see what James has to say about faith, we have got to know that our faith has to be moving and active. It's got to be a verb. It cannot be just a noun. I've encountered people that have thought that way. And the thing is, unless my faith is active, I am no different than the demons listed in James chapter 2. Because they believe in God. One commentary said this. It said, the fallacy of faith without works is demonstrated by the demons, which have a dead faith in God. The demons believe in the sense that they acknowledge that God exists. But this kind of faith does nothing for the demons because it isn't real faith. And it is proved by the fact that it does not have the works to go along beside it. So let me ask you this morning. What is the difference between your faith and the faith of these demons? What is the difference? The atheist will say there is no God, and he'll live his life for himself. The agnostic says there's no way to know, and they too live their lives for themselves. The deist believes in something yet acts on nothing. So maybe I change the question a little bit. What's the difference in your faith and the faith of a deist? Does your faith actually drive you to do something? Do something about it. We think about it this morning. We're going to get down to it, and we're going to throw out several things. Just 3 things for you. 3 things that a real faith does. First thing it does is a real faith will make you do things that just don't make sense. They just don't make sense. And sometimes they just don't make sense to the world. For example, look at us all here this morning. To the world, this doesn't make sense. Why do you go and sit in a building on every Sunday morning? Well, it's a proclamation of your faith that makes you get up, get out of your house, and come together to worship together. Does that make a whole lot of sense? Without God, it doesn't. But with God, it makes every bit of sense. We look in this passage and we begin to think about Abraham. You know, Abraham was asked to show his faith toward God. He was asked to prove it by offering up his only son Isaac. Now, I don't understand the entirety of this story. There's so many things that I begin to ask questions about. Well, did he do it because of, well, maybe he was wanting to see if there was anything that Abraham would keep back from him. I don't know. I don't know the entirety of it, but I learned that Abraham proved his faith by this. I wonder if God was just trying to look at Abraham and see how committed he actually was. If there was anything that would prevent him. And then sometimes, y'all know me well enough, that my funny and my ADD side kicks in. And it goes like this. I wonder if after that happened with Abraham and Isaac, I wonder if it got out to all the other parents. And they started going, now listen, you heard what Abraham did to Isaac. He took him out there, he laid him up on that altar, and right before he was about to take his life, God stopped him. Now, do you want to wonder if God's going to stop my behavior? Straighten up, buddy. You know, I start wondering things like that. But when we look at this story, Abraham chose to go live out his faith. So many other ways than that. You know, I don't think that happened. I don't know, but I do believe and I do think that after that took place, people around Abraham began to learn what a real faith looked like. Because you know they had to know his story. They had to know that at 100 years old they had a child. Where did that child come from? Well, Abraham would be able to tell them it came from a promise from God. So he realized that he lived his life to God. And it might not have made sense in the beginning, but with God it makes sense. There's several other things you can look at. You know, real faith that will make you lay your son on the altar and not know whether God's going to spare him or not. We read through many other passages, and for example, in Hebrews 11, you know, real faith will make you build a boat just because God said a flood's coming. A real faith will make you give up your kingdom and choose to be homeless in the wilderness for 40 years. A real faith will make you walk around the walls of a city for 7 days simply because God said He would deliver it to you. That's what a real faith does. That's what a real faith looks like. And all these examples in Hebrews 11, they don't make sense, but real faith does make sense. It acts on God's will and doesn't worry about how crazy of an idea it sounds. A real faith acts on the evidence God has given us because it doesn't sound crazy at all. Let me tell you what else a real faith does. A real faith involves people. A real faith involves people. I love work camp because I think it's an awesome opportunity to involve people. Because the message that we try to convey is that we didn't do anything to deserve God's grace. Nor did the people we served, did they do anything to deserve us going out and to help them each day. God did not look down at our skin color or our background or our race or anything. He reached down to help us and to save us. Same thing when we go out into the neighborhood. We go out to help and to serve these people. Doesn't matter who they are, what they look like. We're here to serve, and that's the message we're trying to get across. Think about Rahab. In this story, Rahab, just about every time you see her name mentioned, you'll see what goes along with it. Rahab is known for two things. One, being a prostitute. And number two, acting on a faith. You see, it doesn't matter where you've been and the things that you've done, but the faith of God can take you places. It can make you involve other people. You know, Jesus spent His life in a pursuit of helping other people who are in need. Why don't we feel the need to do the same thing? Maybe it's time. Maybe it's money. Maybe it's just we're lazy. But maybe we just don't see like Jesus would see. You look at Rahab, what would it have cost her if she had gotten caught? Her life. If she would have gotten caught, they would have taken her life for treason, for helping these spies. You see, a real faith looks at the needs of others and never asks, what is this going to cost me? Rahab took those spies and helped them escape. You know, real faith, like Rahab's, meets the needs of others. We look at that in James 2, 14 through 17. It says, if a brother is in need, do you tell them to be warm and be filled, or do you actually act on it? Also, real faith gives to those who are in need physically. You turn over to Matthew chapter 25, verses 31 through 44, and you begin to read about all those people in need. Were they in need of food? Were they in need of water? Were they in need of someone to comfort them when they're sick? Were they needing someone to see them when they were in prison? All these things were meeting people's needs. Look in Romans chapter 10, verses 14 through 17. Real faith provides for people spiritually when people are spiritually broken. That's why it's so awesome to see when we have a brother or sister in Christ come forward. They never come alone. Because before you can sing half another verse, they've got about 8 or 10 more people sitting beside them. That's the beauty of what faith does. It involves other people. Let me ask you this. When was the last time you helped someone because you were driven by their needs and not your wants? When was the last time that you saw someone in need because you were actually looking outward instead of inward? A real faith involves other people. The last thing we have here is a real faith will make you endure whatever kind of hardships you face because in the end, you believe it's worth it. That's what real faith does. Hebrews 11, verses 36 through 38 says this. We get through that list of all these people being named about what they had done and the faith that they stood for. We get to here and it says, others suffered mocking and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned. They were sawn in two. They were killed with a sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, and mistreated, of whom the world was not worthy, wandering about in deserts and mountains, and in dens and caves, and on the earth. Let me ask you, what's the hardest thing you've ever faced in your life that was brought on by the decision to live for God? What's the hardest thing you've ever faced? You know, I think about a friend of mine from college named Jonathan. When Jonathan was 19 years old, he was baptized into Christ. And immediately after that, his parents disowned him. I think about a girl named Caitlin, baptized at 17 years old, and then kicked out of her house simply because of that decision. I began to look at my life, and I began to wonder, has my faith ever really cost me anything? Has your faith ever cost you anything? And if it hasn't, I began to ask myself these two questions. One of two things. Either you aren't living your faith out loud where the world can know, or somewhere along the lines, the faith of others has carried you through those tough times. What does your faith cost you? Now you look back at those two situations, and you say, Scott, there's got to be more to the story. And I'm telling you, no, there's not. That's two people in my life that I know that chose to live for God, and because they did, they were disowned by their family. What does it cost you? The bottom line this morning is very simple. A real faith has got to be active. If it's not, it's dead. A faith that does nothing amounts to nothing. That's exactly what James is saying when he ends with the emphatic statement. It may sound morbid to you. It may sound a little over the top. And it might even be a little offensive to some. But when he says in verse 26, faith without works is dead. A faith that amounts to nothing, does nothing, amounts to nothing. And I think about the great philosopher Batman when he says, it's not who I am underneath that defines me, but it's what I do that defines me. It's not who I am underneath, but it's what I do that defines me. This morning we talk about a real faith. This faith has to be active and it has to be living. So you're either in one of two situations this morning if you need prayers of the church. Either you've looked at this and your faith has not been active. Sometimes our faith isn't active because we have things weighing us down. Read Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 1. It says we need to lay aside every encumbrance that entangles us. Because if you'll lay those things down, serving God in an active and living manner is a whole lot easier. And it's possible. We talk about faith in a different sense. If you have not yet put on Christ, why not? What's holding you up? If you're coming here on a weekly basis to worship with us and you've not put Christ in baptism, why not? That's one of the biggest steps of faith that you can make. To believe in God and act on it and want to be immersed into baptism with Him. So as we sing this song, if you have any prayers or any needs, please come while we stand and while we sing.
'Tis so sweet